Hello, and welcome to my presentation for Assessment Task 1 of Learning Literacy. Like the blossoming of a rose, my learning experience has come full circle, and not just in the sense of the gardening penchant I've developed in the past few years. A well-fertilized soil and environment provide the most opportune growing conditions for a beautiful dahlia or snapdragon to blossom. So too does a warm, communicative, and caring environment in one's youth contribute to the most beautiful outcome of an individual's learning literacy journey. As within the growth of a flower or a garden, there is much tending to be done. Within the flower, there is DNA that, when given the right attention, nutrients, and care, has the ability to reach its full potential. My learning journey has been akin to this, with information and learning adding fuel to my growth in my journey to blossoming as an individual full of knowledge, skills, and in the final stage of flowering, seeding to provide that information onto the next generation. In the same sense as that of a flower, my learning and literacy development has seen droughts and nourishing rains. When the climate is dry and unattended, my progress and development has dissipated. But there has been an abundance of showers that have kept me moving forward in a progressive direction, and that has filled my learning with intrigue and nuance that surprises even the most well-acquainted and familiar beholder in my life. As a young child, my mother spent the largest amount of time with my twin brother and I. We often watched movies or played in the backyard or assisted her with gardening. These early interactions set the stage for a trajectory that my evolution would take. The learning during my youth was much akin to setting the foundation, sowing the seed, and tending to the soil, a crucial element in determining a flower's future growth. My earliest experiences of serve and return social etiquette came from the interactions with my parents as well as my twin brother, in a less paternal dynamic. Reflecting on this, I understand that, although nonverbal communication was partly the predominant form of interaction during these years, much of my morphology and phonology was developed during these interactions, and learning how to socialize with my brother daily prepared me for the environments outside of that of my immediate family. From memory, I was hitting all the key development milestones prior to being on cue. Growing up, my father was a national parks ranger. My brother and I often visited him at work and on weekends, frequently went away camping to enjoy the splendor of the outdoors. Being a young child, seeing much of the natural environment and learning about it was some of the first steps I took into processing and building a knowledge that would later develop my interests. I believe that a well-tended to and comfortable environment in my formative years provided myself with a huge advantage as compared to if my upbringing had been dry and desolate of nature. To this day, I still remember my first lesson in kindergarten, detailing that our writing system uses a left to right flow format. Whilst I was aware of this, due to exposure to writings beforehand, the clarity as to why and my own usage of such system during this was a fundamental first step in my written literacy ability. Much of my memories of this time are imbued with imagery of Letterland, characters which feature the likes of Annie the Apple and Ticking Tom. These figures were used to familiarize children and myself with the phonics of letters and their change into values depending on the structure of the morphology of the words they feature in. The social facet of the classroom, alongside the familiarity of having my brother there, made the experience very engaging, and the raise your hand system in the classroom developed my turn-taking awareness within a social setting. At this point, we were all well-sown flower seeds who had breached the surface of the soil and were rapidly growing upwards. In the subsequent primary school years, my syntax was being further developed. The next step in building the healthy foundation of my learning was to branch, or leaf, out to expand my lexicon. Words such as rustic or sarcastic that I had heard through teachers and peers and started to use rounded the daily jargon in which I would speak. And whenever an older peer would exclaim, "You don't even know what that means," the first thing I would do is go home and ask my mom the meaning of the exchange word. The encouragement that eventuated from winning a book award for excellence in the classroom in grade 4 was like a fertilizer to my flower that filled me with pride and, as my mother would say, a desire to excel. As a result of this, I became more inquisitive and participated heavily in class discussion, a trait that has always assisted my learning, engagement, and social capacity within a group setting. That said, it also resulted in a tendency to conversate too much, a lot more than I was required, and I was often reprimanded for doing so. In grade 6, my mother had me attend tutoring for maths to prepare me for high school as I was lagging in mathematics. Interestingly, the tutoring question would later become my first job employer when I was 18. The concern and assistance from my mother and the tutor provided crucial in reassuring myself that I was capable and that others were concerned for my achievements and wanted to see me do better. I wanted to do better. The blossoming of a flower comes not without the assistance of many contributing factors. For myself, without the attention of my teachers, classmates, brother, family, and cousins, I would have been much the same. I was very fortunate to have a close-knit system of people in my life, being from a small town, that allowed much of the elements to interlink. For instance, my second grade teacher was also in a band with my dad. As a result of this, I was exposed to a very comfortable and attentive learning environment that moved just beyond the classroom and even established a keen interest in music and learned the format of how songs are conveyed at a young age. Being a twin, much of my early personality, learning habits, and identity were in line with that of my brother. During the later primary years and early secondary years, this started to change. The competitive side of my personality was beginning to grow, and in order to establish my own identity, I had to be better at my brother than everything. Academia was no different. I had to prove that I was no dandelion nor wallflower, but a powerful, independent sunflower. Conversely, it was also at this point that my attention in the classroom began to wane, and instead of tending to myself and pushing my learning further, I began to rely on already established academic abilities, often unfocused and easily distracted in class due to external influences affecting my self-discipline. The lack of effort for myself can almost be parallel to a withering flower or blight on a flower, only that it caused damage if not properly fixed. High school really allowed my interest in science, English, and history to be further developed, much further than previously due to the volume of information and resources available. The thought of teachers who were specifically informed in those subjects further increased my interest and interactivity. Some of my biggest strengths in high school were my vocabulary, but alongside this was a deficit in my grammatical ability. Knowing lots of words, unfortunately, does not equate to an adequate knowledge of grammar. This said, one of my greatest literary strengths come from an innate desire to learn, an interest in otherwise seemingly trivial everyday facets of life, such as interest in plants, flowers, and trees. When I received feedback in the areas I was lacking in, such as lack of evident planning or meandering around the topic in written essays, I was quick to adjust and would often spend out-of-time class with my teachers attempting to work on this. By the end of my high school years, my literacy journey had fluctuated well and truly, experiencing the damaging droughts and fulfilling rains on and off. At this point, the sun was coming down, and from my many experiences, it was providing fuel to my stem and leaves. They were reaching out and the flowers beginning to bloom, but it needed a slightly bigger kick to get the petals to be as big and bright as they could be. It would be naive for someone to believe learning ends outside the classroom. For many children, the learning of a primary and secondary language is a common trait. Although my father was Italian, this was not the case for me. Following the conclusion of high school, this changed. Frequent trips overseas assisted in the development of a penchant for linguistics and propagated my desire to learn language outside of my own. I had felt an innate desire to connect with my heritage, and as a result, visited my family in Italy several times and exposed myself to the language, as well as Spanish, and have since become quite proficient in those. As a result, my semantical knowledge has been expanded on even further, understanding the roots of words and how much the English language has benefited from them. Although I had a hard time teaching myself, the persistence I had, being one of my greatest strengths, was incredibly important. This persistence was the ingredient my blossoming flower needed. Following on from my travels, as we reached my enrollment as mature age student university to become a science teacher, I've been reacquainted with many of the literary formalities and structures that I believe that I had lost for a time. A goal of these studies is to improve my abilities that I had been lacking in or that had diminished, such as resuming my listening skills and reassembling my narrative discourse abilities. I'm only one semester in, and I've already learned much. At this point, you could say the flower has bloomed. But that would be naive, as learning is a lifelong process, and I know I have much more to do. The blossoming of a flower I am today is a result of a multitude of individuals from my hometown to the mountains of Italy. I hope to extend its blossoming time during my university studies and someday help grow the seeds for future flowers in my students. Thank you for listening to my presentation.